on a really, really serious backdrop, of course, the global pandemic, but there we've seen kind of the strength of accurate, impartial journalism, or at least that is what we're striving to do all the time. And we've seen a real appetite for that kind of information. That is kind of, we're striving to make everything without a favor or any bias, to anybody. And in a world of kind of a little bit of fear, despair, uncertainty, which of course the pandemic have brought us all into, it has been, in a way, I must say, as a journalist, reassuring to see that people really want information they can trust. And we've seen that in kind of in sheer traffic numbers. So television and radio within the UK, where we do most of our radio and television, has kind of just tripled and doubled, and we've had enormous numbers. But digitally, the same has happened. So we've seen kind of a lot of people come to our digital, both our websites and our apps, and also the material we show on social platforms, on our accounts on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, that a lot of people are kind of seeking out our content. So globally, we've seen kind of hundreds of millions of more people coming to us, and that's not, I mean, we actually think this is also something we need to be able to be good enough to achieve. So it's not that we are kind of going to rest on the laurels or anything, but it has, in a strange way, for me as a journalist, been reassuring to see that people have been curious about what is actually going on.
The BBC is doing well through this pandemic. This is great. This is also the era of highly opinionated journalism, and also just opinions and polarized behaviors. Public broadcasters or public news providers, let's go beyond broadcasting, have potentially a big issue here because they cannot have a voice. That's the kind of, above all, they cannot have a voice and opinion. How do you build a strategy that can do well in the world of social media, in the world of opinions and views, when, if anything, that's what you have to avoid as much as you can as a public news provider?
It's actually something I've been thinking a lot about, because younger journalists from across the world, when I've been giving lectures, I've been lucky enough to meet kind of journalists from Argentina, Lebanon, the States, or the UK, Scandinavia, where I'm from. A lot of the younger generations, they've kind of questioned, is it possible at all to kind of make impartial journalism? Or do we have to accept that everything has a point of view? And I think there are two things. First of all, it is a good challenge. Because obviously, like, objective truth forever and ever doesn't really exist. We know everything can we can get more clever, facts can develop, as science develop and stuff like that. But that said, I've thought a lot about it, because it is a challenge to my generation, because I so fundamentally believe in impartial journalism and the need for that. And I think what we might be confusing here is that in social media and in kind of the public debate, it seems like very kind of loud views on different fault lines is kind of dominating the landscape. But is that everybody? That's not the case. If we look at kind of very solid research, about 70% of the population, also among younger people, actually prefer news that are coming from not a particular point of view. So this means that for the BBC, there is no doubt that impartiality is the core of what we are going to contribute with in this world. I am actually really happy that will be supplemented with, I would say, maybe other types of information or publishing that are maybe aimed at specific niches that might be opinionated, and I think that's healthy in a democracy. I'm just saying that it is not one or the other, actually, and it's important to remember that maybe there is actually a big silent majority of people that prefer news they can trust, and news that are not coming from a point of view.
Great. So you have something that you can offer to the public and through the digital platforms, and cut through actually that cacophony of opinion and methinks, isn't it? That is quite dangerous as well. But BBC, going back a bit to what I've asked first, is it's primarily a broadcaster, is doing well, digital, but primarily set up as a broadcaster. As part of this series, we interviewed Mark Thompson, and Mark Thompson talking about the way to kind of way to fix the New York Times for the future was really kind of to a certain degree put the print element perhaps away from the center, not to be the focus of attention, and really focusing on digital growth. Is that what the BBC is doing, or the BBC has a different approach to what it's doing to succeed in the digital era?
It's absolutely the same, but there are also some differences. And the difference was obviously for New York Times and other outlets like that. Let's not forget that they are as big as and as admirable New York Times is. It is a publication that is targeting a very specific part of the global population. Whereas the BBC is different because it is a legal obligation of ours through the Royal Charter to inform everybody, and that means everybody. And that is quite different because a lot of the media outlets, they can kind of target either people that are educated, people that want to pay for subscription, people that are very, very curious about politics or something like that. Where we, and that has always been the strength of, I think, public service journalism, is that it is actually here to serve everybody, and it doesn't really matter who you are. And that is, it doesn't matter which opinion you have, which political views you have, which socioeconomic background you have, which type of job you have, or the level of education you have. And that is just a very different thing, and also a different business model. The other thing is, print, when I was younger, some of my dear friends that work in print or print newspapers, they kept kind of saying, print is so practical because you can bring it everywhere. And we're kind of, yeah, right, They would tell me you could bring it to the loo, and I would say, yeah, right. It's print is not necessarily that smart. You can't really. It's not updated. It's from yesterday, so it might be very good for kind of in-depth stuff, but for the latest news, obviously not that good. Television and radio is a bit different from that, and this is also why I believe you can still see in the numbers that also younger generations are actually watching a lot of television and listening to radio and podcasts still, because it is different, it's different from what used to be print. And that means for the BBC that we are putting digital at the center of what we do, and I can tell more about exactly how we're going to do that. But we do believe, like, deeply, that radio and television will remain to be enormously important for us, maybe forever after, we don't know.
What are you doing? Because you have announced big changes. There are job cuts as well in journalism. So you're reducing, as an organization, reducing the number of journalists operating at the BBC. But you have made a relatively recent announcements in terms of how you are gearing yourself up to improve the digital offering without losing the importance of radio and television as well.
Actually, it's everything we do, we want to do better. And that is because we have kind of analyzed the situation, and obviously, like everybody else, the people we are serving have many more offers than they've ever had before. So every minute they spend with us have to be really worth the time. And we can see that the way we've kind of tackled the development of mobile and digital media is that we've just made more and more and more. And that means that sometimes actually what we are publishing across everything we do is accidentally competing with each other. And some of our very best journalism, or journalism where we have invested months and months in investigations, original reporting, it kind of drowns in the offer. So we have announced that we are going to change our newsroom and our way of working kind of fundamentally. We are talking about a shift in a way of working. One of these shifts you maybe make every 20 years or 25 years. So it's a really big one. And that is going away from a model where programs and output were kind of commissioning all the stories we did in a way where we were kind of, the BBC were so big in the UK and so alone kind of in the market that we were set up a little bit to kind of compete with ourselves sometimes, where now we realize that actually that's not the thing. You know, we have to make sure that the very best we have gets to as many people as possible, which is why we are rebuilding the entire newsroom. So we are focusing on the stories. And that means that when we develop and research a story idea, we produce it from the beginning so it works for digital audiences, for audio audiences, and for video audiences. And then we make sure that we publish maybe different angles of the story, or that we publish in different ways, but so that we make sure all of our audiences is getting this good piece of journalism. And that is a very different way of operating. And that also means that we are having to figure out how we kind of build new teams, where inside the teams we have all the right skill sets. We don't believe that every journalist should be a one-man band that can do everything. We believe in teamwork, so that in each of these story teams, you would have both people that are specialized in research, for instance, specialized in reporting, have good sources, expertise and knowledge, but also people that are specialized in digital storytelling, specialized in television, specialized in doing podcasts, for instance. And out of that, we believe we can create more value for the license fee that people are paying for us.
Oh, that sounds very big and very expensive. How can you afford all that?
It's actually the opposite, because I know this is something managers often say, that you can kind of both slim down and then have higher impact, but we genuinely believe this is what we do here, because we have and I think Tim Davey, our new Director General, has also said the same. You know, we have, in a response to the kind of explosion of new opportunities and media development, we have kind of spread our butter too thinly. And that means that any one thing we make does not necessarily have the impact it deserves. So while we are going to spend more resources on fewer things, we think actually we can do we can maybe cut away around 20% of what we're doing, the amount of stories we do. And this is why we believe we can do this while also being fewer people, which is not something we wish to be, but which is kind of a condition we just have, because we're not deciding ourselves how much money we have, obviously.
How, in that model, in that concept, how do you, the challenge always is, if I am a TV editor, I want to break the stories in my program. I want the best, what I see as the best stories, and I kind of know how to do those stories for that audience. Why should I, in a way, just pick up whatever the story-led teams are generating? Am I just like putting things on the shelf instead of actually producing the program?
That would also be a real loss, because we have to remember everybody working on our programs or our digital output are also really, really good journalists. And that means that we're going to develop our stuff together. It's a combination of skill sets from outputting and from creating the stories that we need. But the thing is that the competition in kind of, the output when we make the programs, when we make our app offer and our website, the competition there for people's time is so fierce that it has never been before. And that means that has to be it has to be so well crafted and also curated and edited, all things that are enormously important editorial skills. So let's not forget, the actual choice of which stories you prioritize, exactly what you leave in the story and what you take out of the story. All of that is journalism and is editorial craft too. So we believe that that kind of curation and editing part is potentially more important than ever. That is number one. Number two is we are, and that is true for a lot of media organizations. I think we have since, once upon a time, we were nearly alone and people had, not a lot of offers, which was why we could sometimes also maybe make stories that were not really the most important stories for people. We might believe they were very important, but people maybe didn't feel so, but they had no other place to go. Now, obviously, as soon as we don't get it right, people are just leaving us and not spending time with us. And that means that, and I kind of love that part of it, because it means the audience has forever taken the control. And that means we have to respect their needs fundamentally. That said, and that is really important for me, is for public service journalism, it's not a question of giving people what they want. It is also giving them the thing they need, they didn't know they want or wanted or needed. And that means sometimes it is also insisting on telling stories that are really important for them and for society, but that doesn't sound, that interesting. And for us to explore what can we do in the way we do it, in the way we publish the stories or tell the stories, that makes it clear why this is important for people. So a fundamental thing in the new model we are building is it is story-led journalism, but putting the audience needs first. And that means it cannot be us as individual editors need that come first. It has to be the audience.
And linked to that, is there enough, if you talk to the likes of Google and many of the other tech giants, they're obsessed about product thinking. And through that testing with the audiences and so on. And talking some of them, and in this series we did as well from Google, they say part of the training and the support they're giving to traditional media organizations is to stop thinking that the newsroom can create and then in a way roll out of a gut instinct or because they know best. That's been the traditional way in many ways. You talked about audience focus, but are you making changes? Are you making adaptations, evolving when it comes to the product development as well for digital, taking those elements into account?
That is such an important point, because actually, to be honest, I believe our journalism is quite good, if I can be as free. A lot of it is really, really, really just, it's based on it's kind of real journalism made by real journalists. They know what they're doing. We have boots on the ground up and down this country, but also all over the world. We have a kind of unique, or I would say shared knowledge about what is going on in so many different communities. And that means that the quality of a lot of our reporting is really, really, really high, I would say. What is difficult for the audiences is actually to find the bits that are important or that are directly relevant to them. And that is due to kind of the way we publish our stuff. So as you said, we were one of the first ones going digital in the 90s, but that can also be seen a little bit in our products now, that they are still kind of, that you can kind of see they were born in the 90s, a little bit like a digital newspaper, where you thought there was kind of a front page and then there would be indexes, business, world, Asia, but modern, mobile consumption does not work like a newspaper. You might want to follow one of our reporters, Cherry Wilson, because you like the way she does her stories. You might want to follow Hong Kong. You might want to follow, the latest on quarantine rules, and you can't really necessarily, unless you are yourself an old journalist like me, you don't necessarily know how to navigate our systems. And that's just one example. I think another example is that we, speaking of the front page, and I think many publishers like us keep thinking of the front page as the front door somehow, which it is not for most of our audiences. They're coming to us from all sorts of channels, through search, through social media accounts, referrals, whatever, they're coming into us. And that means that every single piece of thing we do that people get into has to kind of be understood as the front of our service. And that's kind of our product is not really built to enable that kind of experience. So where's the money, would a good journalist ask, and we are seriously thinking about in the management how we can free up resources to invest in quite a lot of product development.
Imagine with a sizable engineering team as well.
It's obviously that's necessary, but it's not. Sometimes it's put very kind of crudely, engineering and journalists. But actually, I think we have to realize we are a creative business. But what does it mean to be creative? I mean, you need a whole suite of skill sets to create modern media. So you need many different types of journalists and storytellers and designers and people that are visual experts. You also need a whole suite of different skills you could call engineering, but can be, some of them are, you need data scientists, you need UX specialists, you need people that can test stuff, you need people that can code, you need all sorts of things, to get it right. Because in the end, it's again, the control sits with the one, using her or his phone.
I know for the BBC, this is not as much of an issue in terms of financial survival, because the BBC, the funding of the BBC is different, obviously. But there is continuous and a considerable tension between news providers and the tech giants, the channel controllers in a way, more specifically perhaps Google, Facebook, and to a certain degree Twitter. So we're not talking about the money generation here, but how, from your perspective, and this is not about getting into the politics of this, but from your perspective, where is the sweet spot here for a relationship between the tech giants and the news providers so that the audience can win and everyone can benefit in this process?
First of all, this is their $1 million question, isn't it? I think there is a reason why you have kind of regulators or thinkers, all sorts of business people engaging with this question, because it's obvious to all of us that there are some very big problems with the state of play as we see it right now. So, or I would say, just to mention a few, the level of misinformation and how that can be amplified is where I think we see that all of us with concern, or I think including obviously the platforms themselves are kind of what it's kind of got the genie out of the bottle somehow, and what are we going to do with that? Because then as soon as you begin kind of curating a lot more or censoring, some would say, then you might be harming free speech and a lot of other stuff, so that is kind of really difficult. And I think another thing that is really obvious is that there is an interesting question about where value is created and who is extracting the value of what is created, and does that work as a market? And I think we are entering a phase now where we are all a bit more mature, after maybe 20 years where it seemed like first everybody believed this would be a complete democratization of information. And then it turned out, people are being bullied. And by the way, the business model of nearly, all publishing is kind of destroyed overnight for many publications at least, And then there is for the BBC, and that's really important. We are out of the UK. Our activities are commercially funded, and that means it is not unimportant for us whether the business model is viable. But another point that is kind of a challenge for us is the curation. I mean, who puts together, the mix of stories that is the most important thing, for instance? Who makes that choice? And we know there is not one truth about what is the most important, but nevertheless, it is a really, really important part of journalism is actually the curation part, picking between different stories. And that means if we kind of give all of our curation away, then we are losing a very important reason to spend your time with journalism. The context, how everything is proportionate against each other. And this, all of this is just to say that we have a good collaboration with many of the platforms in the world, but we are, as many other publishers, entering a phase where I think we have an increased focus on how we can grow a deeper relationship with our users on our own platforms. And this is because on our own platforms, we control curation, and also we get to know people, and that means we can better test what works. And also, as we know, I was talking about, how do you match the most important and the most relevant content with the right people? You need to know your users for that to be able to have them in your products. And we can't do that if people are consuming our content on third-party platforms alone.
In terms of future thinking, what, obviously in this area, but what excites you and what worries you the most?
Like we journalists, and I really love our craft and believe that it is kind of a cornerstone of democracy. But sometimes it worries me that we can seem to kind of a little too nostalgic about our past, like wanting to try to protect something that once was. I think it is that the sooner we get to kind of a heartfelt and sorrowful goodbye to what once was, but will never come back, I think the better. And it is an emotional journey, I can say, from a personal perspective or experience, is to kind of understand that, that we will, the competition about people's time will be fierce, and the competition will only grow. And a lot of the troubles that we see around us, they are not going to disappear. These are the new terms that we are going to operate under. And but then that brings me to the exciting part, because I do see signs all over the world of journalists and media taking up the challenge, just picking up the glove and getting to it. And you mentioned New York Times before, and I have been really excited to see not only New York Times, but also if you look at some of the from my own kind of part of the world. I was born in Denmark, and many of the Scandinavian newspapers are also they are so good digital offers, which also means that in some of the countries, I believe in Norway, about a third of the population is actually paying for journalism. So that gives me, I'm quite excited that there actually is a way where we can make journalism important and relevant enough to people for them to spend time with it and money.